Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. We're talking today with the leader of the opposition, Mr. Mark Golding, and of course, you're watching Guardians of the Constitution. Now, Mr. Golding, the powers of the leader of the opposition, more political than constitutional. The power to affect change.
Yeah.
It's more, do you agree that it's more a political one than a constitutional one? And it depends primarily on the political capital and standing of the opposition leader. Do we agree on that?
I do. Because ultimately, in a process such as the political process of the country, the feeling of the public and the way that one can mobilize support from the public is ultimately the most powerful political determinant of what happens. We are a democracy and we are accountable to the electorate at least every 5 years. And both at the local government level, which is every 4 years now, or at the parliamentary level, which is every 5 years. So I agree with you that ultimately the power that the opposition has and that the leader of the opposition has as the leader of the opposition is a political power. It is a power to force the government or guide the government through the political heft that one is able to galvanize around a particular position, whether for or against any matter. The constitutional powers of the leader of the opposition are somewhat limited because ultimately you can't stop any legislation as a leader of the opposition other than constitutionally entrenched amendments that the Senate has. We've already discussed that. And you can't stop the government from doing A or B in their executive capacity. You don't have any veto power there. So it's your powers under the Constitution are largely consultative and being able to bring some kind of impact on decision making on a narrow canvas of issues, really important issues, but narrow. On the broader issues affecting the country on an ongoing basis, that is essentially a political power you have. It's not given by the Constitution directly, though ultimately we're all operating within a constitutional framework. But it's really through your relationship with the public, your party's effectiveness on the ground, how organized you are, how cohesive you are, and how you manage with the media. Because the media is also a very critical institution within our democratic system. Social media is there and is increasingly important, but traditional media continues to be very important. And all of these are critical factors that affect how the opposition operates and what power and what pressure one is effectively able to bring to the matter.
Yes, and the shadow cabinet that's selected by each leader of the opposition, do the same principles of collective responsibility or individual responsibility, are they at play for a shadow cabinet?
Great question.
Functioning.
All right, so the Constitution doesn't recognize the concept of a shadow cabinet.
Yes.
That is really just a construct that has emerged in our parliamentary system. And it is now a convention that is generally followed, that the opposition leader will put together a grouping of spokespersons around specific portfolio allocations who speak on those portfolios on behalf of the opposition in Parliament, but also outside of Parliament. So that is just a convention that has arisen. In terms of the principles which guide that, I think that the collective responsibility and the confidentiality principles apply. There's no, as I said, there's no legal framework requiring that, but that is the expectation and that is the understanding upon which we operate. And that is true both on the government side in terms of cabinet and on the opposition side in terms of the shadow cabinet. So yes, when we discuss matters and we take a particular position, even if somebody doesn't agree with it, the expectation is that they will, if they're going to stay in the shadow cabinet, they cannot publicly disassociate themselves from that position. If they feel that strongly about it, there's always the possibility of resigning. But it's very important that we speak with one voice, because otherwise our credibility would be undermined and the clarity of our positions would be undermined.
Yes, and certainly one of the tricky roads that the leader of the opposition or any leader of the opposition has to walk is that of being party president and leader of the opposition. There can be tensions there. I think in the current context where you as leader of the opposition, as I've seen you've done, where you've stood up in parliament and you've encouraged persons to take the vaccination or get vaccinated. If that had clashed with the party position, for example, how would you have straddled or resolved that? It might not be the best example, but that tension between party president, leader of the opposition, does it present itself often to you?
No, it doesn't. Generally speaking, I don't adopt positions which are inconsistent with the party's positions on issues, because part of the way in which our democracy functions in practice is that the party has mechanisms and portals, so to speak, through its organizational structure by which issues are debated on an ongoing basis. And it would be very unlikely, in my experience, for the leader of the party to be taking a position that is not, which is inconsistent with the position that the party as a whole wishes to take. That would present its own issues within the party if the issue was that fundamental. I mean, there have been times in the past, for example, not in the recent past, but I know in the past there have been, in our party, there have been times when the leader wanted to go, thought a particular route was the right way to go, and a majority in the party felt that was not the right way to go at the time. And he was minded to resign, but was persuaded not to, and went with the majority position. That hasn't happened in my political experience, but I'm aware of it as a historical fact. So I think it's very rare that happens. So I don't really see any practical tension between those two roles, actually, because to my mind, they really are synergistic. You know, when I stand up as leader of the opposition in parliament, I'm also standing up as the president of the People's National Party. We all enter parliament on a ticket. You know, we not constitutionally on a ticket, but politically on a ticket.
Yes.
You know, we don't. There's no MP in Parliament who is there just because he's Tom Brown or Mary Stokes.
Maybe George Wright.
They are there because their party has endorsed them as their candidate, and the supporters of that party have supported them. There have been instances in Jamaica where persons who have been popular and influential in a party have left the party and run on an independent ticket and lost. So let us not pretend that isn't the reality. It is the reality. And so I don't see in our system of governance, I mean, there have been independent MPs in the past, but long ago, you know, in the early days of Jamaica's democracy, we had independent MPs were quite commonplace in the first 20 years, say. But in more recent times, as parties have grown, become mass-based parties have, I mean, if you look at it, the political parties in Jamaica, the two main are two of the biggest organizations in the country, along with certain very major churches. You know, they're in every nook and cranny of the society and the geographical and so on. So it is very much part of the political culture of the country. And so, you know, this is why I'm saying when we come to Parliament, this is not to say that we are totally trammeled by whatever views may be felt within the party, because there is some amount of independence as well. And even in the Senate, for example, when I was Minister of Justice, there were some things I brought to the Senate when we were in government, which I had a significant resistance from members of my own side at times, who didn't like the particular direction or some details associated with it. And I would have to essentially negotiate with them to try and reach consensus on a position that they would support. So these things tend to happen behind the scenes, but they're real. So it's not like everybody is always of one mind. But at the end of the day, the system requires that when the position is finalized and presented, if you should support it, because that is part of being a cohesive team. If you feel strong enough about it, then you have options. But that's the way the system works.
Now, one of the things that I think a former Governor General Howard Cook had practiced was that he would have either weekly or monthly meetings with the leader of the opposition. It has not evolved into a convention, but is that something that is currently being practiced?
Yeah, it's not weekly or monthly, it's quarterly.
Quarterly.
I think presently, yes. So myself and the Governor General do meet on a regular basis. We've been doing it by Zoom since COVID and so on, and that works very well. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Now, in terms of keeping the executive on its toes in Parliament, and let us, as you have made it clear, our politics is deeply entrenched in our parliamentary system. How effective would you say is the tool of Prime Minister's question, or even asking ministers question from a opposition standpoint? How effective is that?
I think that is not as effective as, for example, in my understanding of the UK system.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the role of questions, formal questions in the UK system is more central to how the parliament functions than in our system. In our system, the way the rules are configured, you have to, first of all, you have to get the speaker's approval of the questions before you can submit them, and the clerk. And there's a certain amount of bureaucracy involved in that process. And then, so it gives them, the questions sometimes are rejected or modified at that stage before they even come to Parliament formally. Then the rules require the response to be given after, I think it's 21 days.
Yeah.
But frequently, the response is not available at that time. And sometimes it can be months before the response is forthcoming because the information has to be collated. I mean, sometimes the delay may be deliberate if it's a sensitive issue, but for the most part, I think the delay is because the information has to be compiled by bureaucrats who are busy, the civil servants who are working, and this is a new task, So it takes them some time to get that information before it is presented. When it is presented, follow-up questions are permitted, and it can be a useful process, but the timing of it with this significant delay built into it means that quite often the issues are no longer live and topical. So their political bite is diluted because of the time frame involved.
Would you therefore, are you suggesting, I would ask, for us to modify the standing orders?
For this purpose, I think we could. The way in which it works in practice now is that on important issues of the day, the Prime Minister or the relevant minister will come and make a statement. And that statement, then there's an opportunity for the opposition counterpart or the leader of the opposition or the spokesperson for that portfolio to make a short statement in response, and then other members of the opposition can ask questions. So that is a useful sort of alternative, but because it is initiated by a statement that the minister or the prime minister makes, it doesn't allow the opposition to necessarily, well, not necessarily, doesn't allow the opposition to initiate the process, which questions do, the tabling of questions do. So I would say that, yes, this is something which we could and should look at how we can facilitate a more, what I would say, a more spontaneous questioning process during the debating period in Parliament. We only meet typically once a week here.
Yeah.
So the agenda is very full, and also we accommodate a lot of talk. Meaning what I mean is, the ministers ramble on sometimes, and the prime minister is given to making very long presentations, departing from the script, and so on. The time available gets used up. And we are sometimes guilty of speaking a bit long as well. I'm not saying it's only on one side. So I think a more disciplined approach to how we manage time within Parliament, requiring people to be succinct in making their presentations. This is an important, when you argue before the United States Supreme Court, and it may be, similar in the UK, waffling is not entertained. In the US, you're given a specific amount of time to make oral argument, and that's it. Yeah. And I think, that doesn't mean that the quality of the argument is any less effective. It just means that you have to be well prepared and you have to be able to say what you have to say succinctly. And I think that is something that we ought to encourage as well. It's in Jamaica, we tend to like waxing eloquent, but we tend to also be a bit verbose and go on and on and on. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're coming closer to the end of our discussion. Now, moving from leader of the opposition to prime minister, not a very easy task for anyone. And are we in agreement when we say that if you get up every day or each time you go to the parliament and you're just criticizing and opposing, there's no way you're going to get to Vale Royal or Jamaica House. Do we agree on that?
Well, I think that the process by which a government is changed in a country has numerous things at play, numerous factors that come into play. So parliamentary performance is one important one. And I do believe that if you are perceived as being essentially negative and only opposing for opposing's sake, there is a body of persons within the society who that will turn off, because people want to see a more constructive, solution-oriented approach. And certainly we have been trying when, for example, the COVID crisis and the national security crisis, and indeed the whole question of the cost of living and the terrible hardship that people are under now, in all of those areas, we make suggestions on a regular basis as to how we think things should be managed and improved. Sometimes those suggestions don't get much media coverage. Sometimes those suggestions are ignored, and we have to be constantly repeating them. But we take the position that we ought to not just be critical, but also constructive. On the other hand, there's many important things that have to take place outside of Parliament if you're talking about persuading the Jamaican people to support you to form a government. You have to have your political organization has to be properly tuned. People have to be motivated. People have to be pulling together as a team. All of these things are really important. Financial arrangements have to be there to support those activities. So it's not just Parliament and parliamentary performance alone that will make that decision. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of a Prime Minister Mark Golding, that is, what's your position on issues, the more deeper constitutional issues that have always bedeviled our leaders? For example, abolishing the appeals to the Privy Council, removing the Queen as head of state. If we were to be talking to Prime Minister Mark Golding, what would be your position?
On both of those issues, our position is clear and consistent. We believe that an independent Jamaica must have a Jamaican head of state. And we believe that consensus around that has been achieved at the political level with the idea of a president, which would be a non-executive presidency. So the prime ministerial system would remain, and we would remain part of the Commonwealth, the broad Commonwealth of nations, which has its benefits. But the Queen of England, or the sovereign in England, would no longer be the head of state of Jamaica. And indeed, to me, it's impatient of debate that we should go that route, for many reasons. We don't have time. That's a topic all on its own, but that's our position. However, and similarly, our final court, we have funded and established the Caribbean Court of Justice, which is an excellent court and has the structures of independence built into it, both in terms of how the appointments of judges take place and its financial independence through a trust fund that supports its operations. So it's not dependent on regional governments to function. And its jurisprudence is of the highest standard. Yet we have not adopted it as our final court. It only has jurisdiction over trade matters under the Treaty of Chaguaramas, the CARICOM trade arrangements. But final appeals from our court system do not go there. They still have to go to London. And again, we have been against that. We've tried twice to change that through legislation when we were in government, and we have not been able to get the support of the Jamaica Labour Party for that. As regards the Queen, because it is a deeply entrenched provision in our Constitution, unlike some other Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean countries, in order to have the Queen replaced by a Jamaican head of state, we would have to have a referendum and get the majority of the people supporting it. And that, I think, is a political hurdle that governments have been reluctant to embrace, because the nature of referenda is that all sorts of other political factors come into play, and it can have outcomes which have political consequences beyond the issue on the ballot.
Yes.
So I think we have to reach a level of maturity, hopefully very soon, that would allow us to have the confidence to jointly go to the people and say, it is time now, Jamaica, let us move to fulfilling our destiny as a sovereign state and have our own head of state. I hope the Jamaica Labour Party will also see the benefits of giving our people access to a regional court rather than having to hear cases all the way in London. There are all sorts of benefits to that, especially access to justice. The JLP is not yet there. You know, Mr. Siaga seems to have cast a long shadow. You know, even though the idea of a regional final court came from Hugh Shearer way back, he was arguing for it. But somehow it got politicized and we're still stuck with the current arrangements. But we want to see progress in both areas. And we have tried, I mean, twice in case of the Privy Council. In the case of the moving away from a monarchy, the legal work has all been done. The cabinet submission was taken, approved, drafting instructions were prepared. This is when we were in government last, when I was Minister of Justice. But we went with the CCJ legislation first, and then we were coming with the monarchy, the Republican one second, and we never got the chance because we were only in government for 4 years. And the CCJ legislation never passed because the JLP were not yet there to support it.
Now, the leader of the opposition has no cavalry, no army, not a lot of resources. Prime Minister,
we have foot soldiers.
Foot soldiers.
Our workers and warriors.
Yes.
Yes.
The Prime Minister has all those things.
Yes.
So the question I ask you as a leader of the opposition, which of those two jobs do you think is the hardest?
Oh, another really good question. At the end of the day, I think the job of the Prime Minister is ultimately harder, because you have the responsibility of running the ship of state and running it as well as it can be run. And, you know, that is daily pressures and daily problems that need to be resolved. From the leader of the opposition's role, which is essentially a responsive role with a constructive element in it, it's challenging in the sense that politically the government has a tremendous advantage because they have the Jamaica Information Service, they have the clout of the state procurement, to, you know, financially and so on. So there are a lot of ways in which dislodging a government is challenging. But ultimately, I think being Prime Minister is a harder job than being the leader of the opposition. I think fundamentally that is true. Not to say that being leader of the opposition is an easy job. It is not. It's very challenging. But if I had to rank the two, I would say the role of the Prime Minister is ultimately more challenging.
Certainly. And the final question that we always ask everyone on this program is, as leader of the opposition, do you see yourself as one of the guardians of the Jamaican Constitution?
Absolutely. Very much so. And because I have, you know, as an attorney by profession, and somebody who has been a Minister of Justice and have been in Parliament now since 2007, September. So I've been in Parliament, you know, for nearly 15 years coming up. So I have an understanding of the way the system is designed. It's not perfect at all. There are lots of areas it could be improved, but overall, it has ensured that we have had a vibrant democracy where freedoms have been protected. There are also improvements that can take place in that area, but for the most part, freedom of speech and freedom of association have been protected, and we've been able to change governments democratically since 1962 without any problem. When I say no, well, there have been moments when we've had problems, but it has never reached a point where the system has been overturned. So yes, I feel I am a guardian of the Constitution. Not to say I'm not a critic of the Constitution, because I believe it can be improved, but I am a guardian in the sense that the benefits of it and the importance of it, I think, to ensuring that the country is continues to be a strong parliamentary democracy. I understand the needs of that and what goes with that, and I have sworn an oath to protect it, and I take that oath seriously.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure having watched this, you've gotten more enlightened, more information, and we thank Mr. Golding for his continued service to the nation. And of course, in these times, we also thank him for being a critical voice, but also a constructive voice on the issue of taking the COVID vaccine, which I myself do support, and I encourage everyone in Jamaica land we love to get it so that we can increase the vaccination rate and reduce the infection rates. Mr. Golding, thank you very much for joining us on Guardians of the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Mukulu. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Keep up the good work. I think this is an excellent new addition to the discourse in the country. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.